CPST, Professor Nyokabi Kamau, EBS, to give her welcoming remarks and officially open this webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Owino. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us in this 11th webinar series of the CPST that we've been running since 2020. We appreciate your coming, taking time to spend with us this 1 hour. I want to welcome the moderator of this session, Mohammed Ali, Deputy Clerk of the Senate. I want to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Kip Kurui, who works in the Committee on Intergovernmental Relations. Then Rose Osoro is going to be our discussant. They are going to be introduced properly by the moderator, Mr. Mohammed Ali. So, ladies and gentlemen, my role this morning is to introduce our moderator, Mr. Mohammed Ali, MBS, Deputy Clerk of Senate. Mr. Mohammed Ali is a long-serving parliamentary officer. He currently serves in the Senate as the Deputy Clerk, and he's charged with overseeing management of the proceedings of the Senate and offers procedural advice to the Speaker and presiding officers, and he supervises the Directorate of Legislative and Procedural Services, Sergeant of Terms, leadership offices, coordinates external relations, including interparliamentary relations, conference and political affairs, and manages outreach programs. The Deputy Clerk, Mr. Mohammed, is also a liaison person to the Clerk and the House on training matters. Whenever the Clerk is away, Mr. Mohammed performs the duties of the Clerk. As it is this week, is the acting Clerk. Actually, Clerk was supposed to moderate this, and here we have the acting Clerk of the Senate. Mr. Mohammed Ali is a holder of an MA in Business Administration, and through other very robust parliamentary training programs, he has undertaken various trainings, particularly on leadership, ethics, integrity, change management, corporate governance, parliamentary procedure, and practice of institutional management, international law. And he's done these programs all over the world, Washington, ESTAMI, KIM, KSG. So he's also quite traveled, and he's attended various benchmarking attachments where he's been to a lot of Commonwealth parliaments. We do this a lot in Parliament, where you get to learn from other similar institutions like ours. He's done such with the House of Commons. He's gone to the Parliament of Canada, Parliament of France, a little different from us, but now we have a bit we share in common with our presidential system now. Parliament of Australia, Parliament of Ghana, Nigeria, and Zambia, among others. Mr. Mohammed Ali, you've been my colleague for the last 12 years, and I know you're a stable parliamentary officer, and no one would have been better than you to moderate this 11th webinar series for us. So I welcome you, Mr. Mohammed. Take it over from there, and you can introduce the keynote speaker and the discussant. Thank you very much again, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us, and karibu sana to CPST. Thank you. Karibu, Mohammed.
Thank you, Professor Nyokabi, Executive Director, CPST, for those good remarks and the kind introduction.
Thank you. I wanted to say that the three was done well so far because she has been.
We have someone talking. Please, could you mute, please? You're interrupting the webinar, please.
And even the one.
Someone is having a discussion. Please mute.
Sorry about that, our guest, Mohammed. Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Nyokabi, ED CPST. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the globe. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the Legislature in the Transfer of Functions webinar, which is hosted by the CPST, Parliament of Kenya. For those who are joining us within and outside the Republic, we want to take this opportunity to welcome you all. Before I introduce our chief or the lead spokesperson in these matters, who is the lead presenter and the discussant, may I take 1 or 2 minutes to introduce the subject, which is that Article 6 of the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya provides that the governments at the national and the county levels are distinct and interdependent, and it's expected that they shall conduct their business in a mutual relation framework. The same constitution in Article 186 and the fourth schedule to the constitution delineates the functions and powers between the two levels of government. Article 186 of the same constitution also provides for the transfer of functions and powers between the two levels of government. Section 15 of the sixth schedule of the constitution further requires Parliament to legislate on the first transfer of functions. And it is in this spirit that the Transition to Devolved Government Act number 1 of 2012, which stands now repealed in its section 15, required the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution to monitor and oversee the transition process to devolved government pursuant to the Act section 15 of the Act, and of course the schedule to the Constitution. Thereafter, the Intergovernmental Relation Act, which is number 2 of 2012, provides for the transfer and delegation of powers between the two levels of government. The operative statute now is that act, and therefore in 2013, just to take you back, ladies and gentlemen, the CIC, which is the Commission for Implementation of the Constitution, backstopped the various implementation acts for the Constitution, and the implementation of the Constitution Committee in the National Assembly and the Devolution Committee in the Senate oversaw the transition process to the devolved government. The Devolution Committee and the national government have taken that path of ensuring the transfer process. And I wish to say that the Parliament of Kenya, both houses, have undertaken also this process of transfer of functions. The initial transfer happened with the superintending framework of the committee, what I will call the Transitional Authority, and later on then the CRA. And I'm glad today we have colleagues who continue or may have served in the successor organizations. One, we have Dr. Samuel Kipkurui, the Chief Executive Officer of IGTRC, which is the successor organization of Transitional Authority. And I'm sure having that insight into what it was and what it is now, Dr. Kipkurui is better placed to be the lead presenter on these matters. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the IGTRC now, and he has a decade of exemplary service in devolution and governance matters within the Republic. Formerly, he's been the technical lead for intergovernmental affairs at the Executive Office of the President. He will also be supplemented by FCPA Rose Osoro, who is also an accomplished public officer, but she also she's the former commissioner of CRA, and therefore also with that extended the knowledge of how it was and how CRA appreciated the issues of transfer of functions and also the resourcing of county government. She also is a leader in this aspect of devolution matters. So welcome on board, Dr. Kipkurui, and former commissioner. Do I say former or always a commissioner? FCPA Rose Osoro, to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, then we will start the session. This is a webinar that is timed. We have exactly less than an hour for the whole presentation, which we will have. We already had the intro. I'm done with the introduction of the lead presenter and the discussant. Daktari, you will have not more than 20 minutes, so you can save a minute or two for the rest of the colleagues. And then FCPA Osoro will have not more than 15 minutes. Then thereafter, we'll have 15 minutes for plenary, and then 3 to 5 minutes to do the closing remarks and the vote of thanks. But again, within the plenary setup, may I ask all the attendees to please key in the necessary questions that you may have. In the end, then we will take up those questions, and I will ask the lead presenter, and the discussant to respond as and when necessary. In case there will be a technical hitch, my colleague, Professor Nyokabi Kamau, assisted by Harrison Owino, who is also our Chief ICT Officer, will be available to assist in case of a technical hitch. Let me take this opportunity, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome Dr. Kipkirui to make his presentation. Dr. Ari, welcome on board.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Clark Ali. I want to first, from the onset, appreciate CPST for organizing this webinar. I know it has been postponed maybe twice, maybe thrice, but regularly we have been able to be in touch through your officer, Peter. And I want to appreciate very much Professor Nyokabi, the ED for CPST. Thank you, and I am glad to join you once again after a few years of being absent from your classes. I want to, from the onset, declare that I've been your student while I was serving in the county assemblies. And some of the conversations I'm going to make here, if I don't quote you, please remember, part of the presentation is what you trained me on. So without much ado, because of the constraints of time, I want to appreciate everyone who has joined, the members of parliament who are here, and of course, Commissioner Rose. Nice to meet you again from the other side. Having worked with you on the issue of at CRA, when we were talking about the issues of allocation of resources, and now that we will be very good friends now, and not like before. So I declare that from the onset. So for the members of parliament, the members of county assembly who have been able to join this webinar, I welcome you to this presentation. I would be very straightforward in the conversation that we want to have on the issue of the transfer of functions and the place of the legislature for that case. And sitting here as the CEO of IGRTC, we all know that as Mohammed Ali had mentioned earlier on, that IGRTC is one of the institutions which were established by IGRA Act of 2012. And like he mentioned clearly, that we are performing the residual functions of the defunct Transition Authority, which was the entity established under law to coordinate the transition activities in the 47 county governments and the national government. Besides performing the residual functions of TA, we also mandated to coordinate the day-to-day administration of the national and county governments summit, the Council of Governors, as well as also undertaking alternative dispute resolution within the intergovernmental space. So a majority of the mandates that we have are those which were performed by TA. And as mentioned by Mohammed Ali, some of the mandates that were done by TA were concluded, but the majority were transitioned into IGRTC. And ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that there is a national consensus that devolution is the most visible benefit of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Devolution, therefore, has to stay, and we can only focus on how to deepen, expand, consolidate in a shared national pursuit for improved public service, accelerated and inclusive national socio-economic development and employment creation. The devolved governance system is therefore locked in the constitutional order, and that it is extremely difficult from where we sit to readily change, especially the governance structure, either politically or through any other socio-political measures. The role of the legislature then in the whole of the circle of devolution can therefore not fail to be emphasized. That in parliament and in international assemblies, both the Senate and National Assembly and the county assemblies in the county level. Some of the basis for the transfer of functions, which we are talking about, has been recognized that while devolution was significantly contributed to the improved access to service delivery and addressing legacy inequalities in development resources, allocation and delivery of public services, IGRTC also has recognized some of the facts that one, the transfer of functions between the national and county governments, which will entail concurrent transfer of resources, that is both operational facilities and human, including fiscal, has yet to be fully implemented. Two, some sectors, there are ambiguities and disputes in the transfer of functions and resources between national and county governments, and also between the ministries in the national government. There have also been established gaps in the law that underpin and which have undermined the spirit of consultation, cooperation, coordination between national governments and county government. And I would give a very good example. We have just come from a doctor's strike. For the last 10 years, there have been consistent strikes by various employees of both national and county government. But that gap has been recognized from time to time, but it has never been solved. And it is a gap that we are recognizing as IGRT, that is a gap that needs to be noted by both the legislature and the executive for purposes of solving it through legislation to be able to do away with such instances. Additionally, improved IGR, that is intergovernmental relations, consultation, cooperation, and coordination between two levels of government and between county government presents opportunities for consolidating and deepening devolution in a shared national pursuit for improved service delivery. Fortunately, His Excellency, the President of this Republic, William Samoei Ruto, are strongly and unequivocally committed to strengthening our devolved system of government. If you will note in the plan,
Daktari, you've muted yourself, please. Sorry.
Sorry, I was saying, I was making reference to the plan, that is the manifesto for Kenya Kwanza government, that they made reference to devolution in 2 points. One, that there will be effective transfer of devolved functions to the county government, and B, there will be a new dynamism in functioning of intergovernmental relations institutions, especially the national and county governments coordinating summit and the IBEC. It is on this basis then that IGRTC has significantly been able to fast track on the process of transfer of pending functions of the county government. And if I will take you through the journey, because we are talking about the legislature, I will take you through the journey on the transfer of devolved functions, that by the end of the transition period, the defunct transition authority had gazetted for transfer all the devolved functions to county governments, pending functional analysis and costing in a number of functional areas through gazette notices. There are quite a number of gazette notices that I may not be able to read through, but all of us will recognize that the functions that were transferred by TA, they are quite huge and runs in numbers. About 9 gazette notices were published to transfer the functions. Subsequently then, IGRTC, as the legal successor of TA, analyzed and provided clarity through public legal notices for 1, the transfer of library function, the transfer of disaster management, transfer of cooperative function, and the legal notices. I will be able to share this presentation where all of us will be able to access the legal notices in reference that I'm talking about. And as a process leading towards adequate financing of devolved functions, an attempt to cost the functions had been initiated by the TA. And I'm glad that FCP Rose is here, that this component of function, of transfer of functions and resources, the component of costing has become a real challenge that we must be able to find a solution. Because if you notice that the costing of the functions had been initiated by TA. However, the exercise was never concluded. And I can confirm today, what we are transferring as resources following the functions that have been transferred are just the rationalization of the budgetary items from extracts of the budget. The exact costing for the functions are yet to be done. And currently, the county governments are allocated resources based on historical costs previously linked to the functions, as were implemented by the then national central government under the defunct constitution. And IGRTC is therefore at the forefront to ensure that the devolved functions are adequately financed through an agreed medium. And I would take at this point that now that we are speaking to both legislature, the national legislature and the county legislature, that issue of costing of the functions should be taken up for further discussion, so that as we are unbundling these functions and transferring the functions, we need to be very clear that the costs assigned to those functions, as I have mentioned, are just from analysis of previous budgetary allocations and the elements of the functions that have been transferred. There has never been a proper costing of the function. So it is an element that we might want to have further conversations on. So then the legislative role in the transfer of functions process. What is the role of Parliament in county assemblies? Parliament has been instrumental in allocation of the requisite financial resources towards the devolved functions, including the most recent allocation towards the library function, amounting 425 million, and for 6 million towards the museum function. That is the latest. But of course, we are saying Parliament has also participated in the allocation of funds through the DARA and CARA. And now that we have also additional division of revenue allocation, which is passed through the board legislatures, Parliament has also led to the different fronts towards amendment of different legislations identified to be inhibiting the effective implementation of the devolved function. Key amongst them, there are quite a number of legislations which still exist from before the devolved structure of government. But there are quite key amendments that have happened to a few legislations. And I would note one, in the Wildlife Conservation Management Act of 2013, National Museums Heritage of 2016, PFM Act 2012, the Alcoholic Drinks Act 2012, IGR Act of 2012, Urban Cities Act of 2011, and County Government of 2012. County assemblies have also subsequently played a consequential responsibility in ensuring that the anchoring legislative instruments at the county level are operationalized. Despite the numerous efforts, there is need for concerted efforts to ensure that the objects of devolution are realized. IGRTC has isolated 93 pieces of legislation currently requiring amendments and repeal by Parliament. This is in the process of being forwarded to the National Assembly and Senate for consideration so that we're able to align. We are talking about after the Big Bang when we transferred functions. And as earlier indicated by Deputy Clerk Ali, functions were transferred immediately because of the pressure of the moment. However, the resources, you hear the counties and we hear the governors constantly complaining about the resources that are allocated to the counties. But the big question that we have never asked ourselves is, are the functions that are being performed in the counties, are they well funded? Because the challenge we have been having a discussion is about the release of the funds that have been allocated. But the question should be, are they sufficiently funded? Have we costed these functions so that we are saying, are we inhibiting service delivery? We hear the issues of duplication of functions, where some of the functions that are devolved as per the Constitution are still being performed by the national government. Some of the functions that are devolved to county governments are still being performed by semi-autonomous government agencies. The question would be, are these resources then that are being budgeted for by the legislature? That is the question. The legislature is allocating these resources to these semi-autonomous government agencies, which are performing functions meant for the devolved units. And yet, the devolved units are not sufficiently funded. The question is, the role of IGRTC in this would be, we have been able to identify those legislations, those semi-autonomous government agencies that we feel, based on law, are performing functions that are meant for the counties. And we are saying, based on the support that we have, the political space that there is now, it is the right time that all these legislations are either repealed or are amended to align to the Constitution. And the current status then on the transfer of the devolved functions are, as we may recall, IGRTC had previously published legal notices through the Gazette Notice 16170 in December last year, and which was later recalled. Why? Because there was need for, when you look at the Constitution and the mandate of IGRTC, it is expected that IGRTC transfers functions to align as assigned by the Constitution. And these functions are gazetted. However, the stakeholders in this space are the county governments and the national government. So that Gazette notice was recalled. And currently we are building consensus on a few of the elements of functions that have been unbundled that need to be transferred. And subsequently, it is expected once these functions are published, the legal notice is published, and hopefully in due course, maybe within the next 14 days, that is done. Then we will now want to identify the attendant resources to those elements of the functions that have been transferred to both levels of government. Remember, the first transfer of functions that was done by TA was the transfer of functions that were being performed by the defunct local authorities. Now we are coming to the phase where we are unbundling further the same functions, and also clarifying functions to either levels of government. So the phase that we are in now as IGRTC is to be able to clarify the functions as assigned by the Constitution, and further clarify how then these functions are going to be implemented moving forward. The objective then of the transfer that we are currently performing is for identification of constitutionally assigned functions to the county governments, analysis of identified constitutionally assigned functions to the county governments pending transfer, further clarification of previously transferred functions deemed unclear by the government. Then also, we want also to review the identified pieces of legislation, like I mentioned, 93, developed either prior to 2010 or post the promulgation of the Constitution 2010 for purposes of review or repeal. Finally, identification of pending resources related to the functions pending transfer, that is both financial, human, physical, and the systems as well. We have established over time, within the last 2 months, as we have been clarifying, that there is consensus within the law that functions that are performed by county governments can be implemented by the county government. But we also recognize that the law allows that any level of government can agree that the other level of government perform a function that is residual to either national government to be performed by county government, but it has to be done within the confines of the law. So that is also something that all of us, if you remember, when we go back to when devolution started, we all knew very well that whatever belongs to the county belongs to the county. Whatever belongs to the national government belongs to the national government. But now we are reaching a phase where we are saying some of these functions that have been assigned by the Constitution can be performed by either level of government through agreement. If national government today agreed that the function, say, of wildlife can be performed better by the county government, then the law provides Article 189, where that level of government can hand over the implementation of that function. But remember, still they would not lose the constitutional mandate of the function. So that is where now we are coming, as you realize, as we transfer the functions in the subsequent months coming, some of the functions will be left to be implemented by another level of government aside from the assigned constitutional mandate. Secondly, some of these functions also that we have been able to identify, there are a lot of confusion. I would pick a very good example where there was no clarity on the issue of energy reticulation and water reticulation, that we need to realize there are some aspects of the reticulation that either level of government can be able to perform, and the other level of government may be able to cede that component to another level of government. Finally, I'll talk about the way forward that we are looking at as IGRTC on the issue of unbundling of functions. That one, to mitigate on the associated risks, IGRTC shall be publishing the legal notice in a phased out manner per function. That is to say, any function that is still contentious between the two levels of government will continue to build consensus, because one of the principles of the transfer of functions is non-disruption of service. So we will not be able to transfer any function that is still contentious until we build consensus. Finally, IGRTC intends to roll out the respective sector forums to provide platforms for further consultation on the pending issues. And thereafter, we intend to ensure that the costing process of these functions are carried out in an orderly and a proper manner, not as it was in the previous year. I know you have had the county government asking that the funds due for the functions that have been identified be transferred to them. But I would say the process of transfer of resources, we transfer the function. We will then subsequently identify the attendant resources. We will evaluate the resources that are required for that county or that level of government. Finally, we will be able then now to say, we have transferred the function, then we will transfer the resources. And the resources in this case, like I mentioned, includes human resource, includes financials, includes systems, includes removing assets. So the process of transferring the entire resource as a resource is long and tedious. And McHugh, the parliament now, as we speak, has been able to already plan for 2024-2025 financial year. So budgets have, the process of budgeting process has already been able to proceed. If we were to transfer these functions in the next 2 or 3 months, It then means even the county governments cannot be able to get the resources for those functions in the next financial year because already the budget process has gone. So we are looking at then by September, when we are going to have the budget policy statement, if there are any functions that will have been able to transfer and resources that have been identified, then the earliest we are looking at to the counties or resources going to the counties, the earliest you're looking at is the next financial year, 2025, 2026. And that is looking at the provisions of law. So the place for the parliament and the legislators in this point is, if we are aware at this level that coming to the next financial year, some of these functions will have been able to be transferred to the counties or to both levels of government, there will be resources that are attendant to it. Is for parliament now, as we look out to the next financial year, 2024, 2025, 2026, these are the provisions that we should be asking. And again, parliament at the county assemblies, as you also look at the phase of transfer that we are in now, the other question that we're asking ourselves at IGRTC is, there is an expectation that we would have been able to carry out an evaluation of the implementation of the functions that have already been transferred both levels of government. The big question to Parliament would be, has there been any report by any parliamentary committee or any government agency, or even to the county governments? Has there been a report
you have
by...
to conclude. Sorry for the interruption. You have half a minute to conclude. We are pressed for time.
Actually, that was my last question. I was going to ask that question, that the challenge that we should be posing to legislatures is, like I was saying, have we been able to appreciate the status of implementation of devolved functions? Secondly, have we been able to appreciate at the national level? I am aware, you also agree with me, Deputy Clerk, that post-2015, the discussion about devolution has taken only centrally the issue of budgeting. You remember in 2016, the challenge that the Senate was going through on the issue of division of revenue allocation. I was among those who went to court. But the question is that beside that budgetary challenge, have we looked at the implementation of the function? Finally, to the county assemblies, these resources coming to the county assemblies, do you have, we always focus on the Auditor General's report. We always focus on the demands by COB. The question would be, as members of county assembly carrying out oversight, the implementation of those functions that have been devolved to the counties, what is the status? And that is where we are coming as IGRTC. In the next financial year, we are looking forward to partnering with the legislature through the report from the summit, which we are going to accumulate a report from the summit. It will be tabled to Parliament and to the county assemblies so that we start having conversations on the next phase of devolution. So I thank you, Honorable Clerk, for the time, and I would be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari, for that wide range of case scenarios and simulation of what is supposed to be and where we came from and what the future holds. And, looking at your bio as the former Secretary General of the County Assemblies Forum, I'm sure you have that wide range of bird's eye view. And thank you for that. So may I, before I introduce, before I welcome FCPA, Rose, may I acknowledge, ladies and gentlemen, senior members of the Republic who have joined us. I can see noted by any order. I see Honorable Yvonne, Chair Budget Committee, County Assembly of Embu, welcome on board. I see Honorable Cecilia Ngetich, former member of Bomet County Assembly. I'm sorry, I am not sure it is because I can't see the exact title. So if I miss it, my apology. I see Robertson Kabucho, County Director, Hans Sindel. I see Right Honorable Elizabeth Ayo, former Speaker, Homa Bay County Assembly. Honorable David Koech, former Chair, Education Committee in Parliament. I see Dr. Dominic Biwott, Regional Advisor, North Rift, British High Commission. I see Mr. Osman Mohammed, former chair of SOCAT and former clerk Wajir County. And then finally, I see Honorable Lillian Gogo, MP for Ragwe. Welcome on board and thank you for joining us. May I now take this opportunity to invite FCPA Commissioner Ross, our discussant today, to take the floor. You have 10 minutes, Commissioner.
Thank you. He primed the moderator for the session. I've listened carefully to what the CEO IGLTC has said, and it is great to recognize that work is ongoing, that we are moving on. It's interesting. People say that wisdom is like grandchildren. They come long after you have even died. But then when I looked at this topic as I was preparing for this, I saw a huge gap in terms of what is the role of Parliament in the entire process. If I may share my screen and I can show you. Oh, the host has disabled me from sharing. If the main topics that the main issues that I saw in all this process and what the role of Parliament is, because we all understand we took the Big Bang Theory, we transferred all our functions on day one, subject to a few other issues that needed to be taken care of. But essentially on day one, that is August of 2013, all county governments had their functions. Like there's no county that didn't have a function. All of them were transferred at that particular time. There are a few others that needed to be cleaned up. So as the transfer happened, it's good to recognize that that transfer happened through a Gazette notice. And I want us to underline the aspect of a Gazette notice. Internationally, what is the role of Parliament in terms of transfer of functions? According to our acts, it says that Parliament is supposed to be notified, county assemblies are supposed to be notified. The word is notified. Is that sufficient for effective transfer of functions? No wonder we are having issues in terms of transfer of functions. How I thought that we could actually have a active participation of the legislature in terms of transfer of functions. We are thinking who oversees the transfer of functions to see that it is adequately performed by the level of government that has been allocated those functions. Who oversight the aspect that they are fully financed to be able to deliver on their services, none other than the legislature. So leaving it for the executive, because if it's done through the Gazette notice, then it's entirely an executive process. And if it's an executive process, I'm wondering at what point do we, as Parliament, put our feet into this entire process? I remember
Commissioner, Commissioner, sorry for the interruption. I asked whether you can share the data. Please,
am I able to share now? Okay,
yes.
all right.
Yes.
Let me look for it.
Thank you.
What I have there, I've got a full presentation which I'll share, but I just wanted to share this screen here that talks about the functions itself. If you look at the agreement in terms of transfer of functions, it is signed by an authorized person. The authorized person is not named. Probably it could be what probably we saw is probably the governor handing over the functions to national government, published in the Kenya Gazette, National Assembly to be notified, County Assembly to be notified. There is no mention whatsoever in terms of public participation in this entire process. So I'm just thinking that we need to rethink the process of transfer of functions. What we need to recognize is that transfer of functions is not going to end tomorrow. There's no point that we'll say now it has ended. It continues to increase in terms of complexity. It continues it's a function that will never end. Even those institutions that have lived like they've had devolution for over 100 years, but there's still aspects of transfer of functions between levels of government that we need to ensure that Parliament has an active role in this process. Remember, like if a county government, for instance, we know the one for Nairobi that happened recently, that Nairobi County transferred all their functions most of their functions to national government. Who was a participant? Most of us read, and I even believe even Parliament read it in the Gazette, in the newspapers, just like most of the other people. Where was public participation in that fight? What is the role of the National Assembly in that? So for me, in my thinking, I'm thinking as we move forward, because we are here to strengthen and deepen devolution, to be able to have the gains and the promise that devolution had in this country, then we need to deepen that process and make it a little bit more engaging, so that we have many more participants in this process. If we do that, then it creates legitimacy for transfer of resources. It creates legitimacy for building of capacity of the ensuing transfers. I remember like the aspect of impeachment of governors. At first, there wasn't really a clear focus on what could happen. Actually, people would just sit and they actually impeach a governor. When we realized what the problem was, we had to strengthen the role of the Senate. We had to strengthen the role of Parliament in this entire process, so that we give it due process, we give it due course of justice, and it doesn't just happen like somebody has closed a door and they're able to transfer functions, which is actually happening as we speak now. The CEO, Chepkonya, has just told us that they are about to transfer functions. I'm a Kenyan, and a Kenyan who is really interested in devolution. I don't know whether they've asked for my input in terms of that discussion. What happens all the way to the National Assembly? So in terms of costing of functions, I'm a student of devolution and decentralization. I've read every single book that you can think of in terms of decentralization. And the aspect of costing functional analysis is very nicely described in books. But when you come to reality, they say vitu kwa ground is different. In the ground, you're not able to differentiate what is a need and what is a want. So unless we are able to differentiate what are need expenditures and what are wants, that is the only way we can be able to say this is the cost of this function. Another big element that is missing is the aspect of norms and standards. We actually do not have norms and standards that cover most of the functions that we claim to transfer. You could be transferring the aspect of road construction maintenance. Who knows how much it costs to do a road, for instance, in Marsabit? Is it the same cost as doing it in Nyamira? Is it the same cost as doing it in another region in the center? Those things, if we don't have adequate norms and in standards already in place, which might not even be possible because of the geographical and in terms of differentiation of the regions that we deal with, probably this aspect of costing of functions will continue talking about it and it will never be done. I was in the team that was working on the costing of functions. We did the best that we could, but you could see the much data that we generated in terms of the norms, the standards. You talk to an engineer tells you the road cannot be the same between Machakos and Nairobi, and all those things. So in terms of, and that is why as CRA, in terms of sharing resources, we went with the comfortable notion that what are the available resources? The available resources that we have are the ones that we're going to share, because Kenya is scarce in terms of resources, just like all people. But let's start from the available resources, and then we can be able to see how efficiently at county or national level can these resources be utilized for us to move forward as a country. Because if we go to costing of functions, we are actually being derailed, whatever. It's a good subject when we discuss it in textbook theory, but practically when you come to the ground, because of the scarcity and limitations of the data that we have, it may not be able to be addressed. Yeah, so for me, the discussant, the transfer functions are going on, but I think that Parliament is missing in this entire process. I don't know what we are going to do, amend some of these acts so that we return some of these powers to the oversight bodies of this or of the country, so that they can even monitor and ensure that whatever decisions that have been made are actually effected at that point, and somebody is held accountable at that particular moment. Yeah, thank you so much. And that could be my contribution this morning.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that presentation. I'm sure you will favor us with the soft copy of your presentation. And I'm sorry for giving you 10 minutes. I'm sure you needed an hour to elucidate these matters of transfer of function. But nevertheless, we will always have this webinar, and we will be always available to invite you for further exposition on this matter. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me to thank the lead presenter and the discussant. And may I encourage you, please, to continue logging in to the Q&A section so that you can ask as many questions as possible, because we may not be able to cover many of the aspects of the transfer of functions within an hour. So, and we have less than 15 minutes to conclude. So please continue logging in and input your questions. So may I, before we go to plenary, may I recognize the presence of, not by any order, Mr. Steve Kadondi from CRA, Commission for Revenue Allocation. May I also invite join your colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, to also acknowledge Mr. Let me just see, that is Dr. Albert Koche, former chair, CAF, and former Speaker Elgeyo Marakwet County Assembly. As soon as I notice any other VIP or former members of parliament and leaders in the Republic, I'll be able to recognize from time to time during the webinar. May I then, we are at 11:44. We will have, ladies and gentlemen, we will have 10 minutes of plenary. And therefore, I'll be asking interchangeably the lead presenter and the discussants to answer the questions. And I'm sure the questions are also available to the presenter and the discussants. So you may be able to pick any that you may. But I see an anonymous attendee, just for information of the rest of the attendees, who's asking, are there some already developed functions which will better be performed by the national government? And then the same anonymous attendee asks, is the Urban Areas and Cities Act adequate in handling the management of towns and cities? And then further goes on and say, any legislative proposals to cure this by Parliament? And then I see another question by Nyapere Leonard. While being appreciated that there are disputes or gray areas to be addressed between the, I think means the two levels of government. I think that's what he means. Is it in order to have definite timelines to resolve such issues? Maybe Dr. Kipru, you could go ahead with that, and then we will take the next.
Oh, thank you, Ali. I think before I go to the questions, there is something that I wanted, so that we don't lose a very key comment by my colleague and friend Rose on the role of the Parliament. I would want to interest both the National Assembly, the Senate, and also the county assemblies to Section 10 of the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, the requirement for the summit to submit a report to both the National Assembly and the county assemblies. While at that, then that should be informed if there is any takeaway from what Rosa has said on the issue of what is the role of the National Assembly and the county assemblies in the transfer of functions. When you read through there, that is where now we can have a conversation next, because there are quite a number of gray areas even with that report. And I would want us to have a conversation. And I'm already putting in place some of the avenues that we might want to have a conversation where we are able now to bring back the role of the legislature into the transfer of functions. If I may proceed then to the questions because of time, there are some of the already devolved functions which would better be performed by national government. I would say, in the question that I posed among as the last, have we been able to assess the implementation of these functions for us to arrive at a situation where we're saying this function that was transferred to county government has failed to be performed as it was envisioned in the constitution or national government? So while at that discussion, we can be able to pinpoint a few that you may feel, or you may, as a Kenyan, you can be able to identify and say that should have been better done. But by whom? So the question would be, what basis would we use as a IGRTC to be able to say this function has failed to be performed as it is, unless we carry out an assessment of the implementation? Goes back to what Ross talked about. Do we have standards? Did we have any standards or norms that we are going to use as a basis for that analysis assessment? So yes, there would be those which Kenyans feel that this would have been done better by this level of government, but then for us to arrive at that, an assessment has to be done, an analysis has to be done. It has to be based on fact. We yet don't have, like Rose said, we still need to look back into that. Secondly, is the urban areas and cities adequate in handling the management of towns and cities, especially where roads are concerned? Currently, Kera is still in space and could see encouragement on the management of urban areas by counties and legislative proposals. I think first, we need to recognize the Urban Areas and Cities Act. The urban centers in the counties are a structure in the devolved government. So there would be no feeling that the county government is encroaching on the responsibility or mandate of an urban center. Remember, these are creations through legislation. We are guided, there is the Urban and Cities Act, but these cities and urban centers, the county assemblies have a role in the establishment of the same. And so, for me, I think what we would be talking about when you talk about Kura is the functions that are being performed by Kura. Is it devolved or is it national? Are they overstepping on the mandate of a county government, and yet they remain to be a government agency, a national government agency? And those are what I say. Once we do the transfer of or the unbundling and clarification of the functions that we are currently transacting on, that would be able to clarify further, so that some of these agencies, you had the president mention a while ago, that some of these government sagas in the national government will be deemed redundant once this transfer is done. So some of them will just, once the functions are clarified and transferred, then they will cease to exist or to be encroaching on a function that is not theirs. Then I would go to Nyapere. While being appreciated that there are disputes, gray areas to be addressed between the relations between the two levels of government, definite timelines. Oh, yeah, I agree. Remember, if you look at IGR Act, the ADR, it has timelines for every dispute that is registered by at IGRTC by either level of government. The process has a timeline and needs to be, as much as we don't have any existing legislation or framework that gives us timelines, but as a form of ADR, definitely we have had some best practices that are able to give guidelines to be able to get those disputes addressed. I think faith on the intergovernmental. Yes, faith on intergovernmental. I think that one I would take that, and then I leave the rest.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Ross.
I think you could take the one by faith. Yes.
Yeah. Faith, the Intergovernmental Relations Act takes care of the summit COG, but leaves out the legislative aspect. That is to say, the legislature. I think talking about that, earlier you indicated that, yes, I was the Secretary General of County Assemblies Forum, and I was able to also try to champion for the inclusion of the legislature in the summit. But looking deep into the structure of government, that is the executive, where the president and the 47 governors sit. So the existence or the presence of the legislature in such a sitting will be able to infringe on the legislative independence and the executive independence, because these are the executive of the counties and the executive at the national. So I think what we had thought is what was missing, what should be missing is what I've said. If you look at the IGR Act 2012, Section 10, it requires the reports of the summit to be submitted to National Assembly Senate and the county assemblies. That is where now the participation of the legislature in the decisions, resolutions of the summit. That is the point that we now need to be having a conversation into and say, what happens to those reports? Will that be reports be sufficient to participation and engagement of the legislature?
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. For just interest of time. We have very many questions. Commissioner Osoro, you could take the question by Lucy Kibayu, and then there is the anonymous attendee who's asking very critical questions. A question by Wendy Tiani, and then anonymous, Mr. Osman Mohammed, and then we have Kamuche Menza, and then also Omore Osendo. You could take that and then see what available more time we have. Please, within 4 minutes, if you can.
Thank you, moderator. Let me start with a question by Faith, asking if the presence of the legislature in the summit will be sufficient. I can comfortably say that that can't be sufficient. What we need to do is amend the act to require parliamentary approval, so that when it goes to parliamentary approval, then it is tabled to parliament and it goes through its own process within parliament for it to be approved, and they are able to hear everybody else. The same way the budget goes to parliament. So sitting in the summit won't solve it. But if the act says that it requires parliamentary approval, not submission of a report. You know, a report is sent, nobody says what the report is meant to do. Is it to be accepted, to be filed, to be kept away? What is the role of the receipt? If they put for approval, that will turn everything out. And then we are saying, is there a law that a scenario where the legislature can transfer a function to another level? That is another thing that we need to discuss as Kenyans and see, is this something that is viable? And I think this is within the standing orders of parliament and the county assembly to be able to share, because if they are not able to share some of these functions, I think it's important that a conversation is held on that, and then a way forward determined. It's a huge gap. It's not mentioned anywhere, Lucy, that that process should be, unless it is in the standing orders of the various of parliament. The aspect of regional authority, I also have the issue of institutional memory in terms of regional authority. For sure, regional authority, some of the functions that they were performing before looked like county government. But if you interrogate a little further, you can be able to understand the regional authorities have their own role. They don't belong to one county, rather they belong to an ecosystem. Like if you talk about the Tana River, it goes all the way to, it just follows the Tana River where it is, and the development around it. So they've got a peculiar reason why they exist, and I believe that is why at that point when functions were being transferred, the one for regional authorities didn't happen as fast. But I know they also amended their statutes to exclude county government. I don't know whether it's like that in practice, but ideally they are supposed to be looking about the regional economic development, regional coexistence of the counties, because they represent more than one county. Was developing the health function ideal with focus on standardized provision of service in different counties? A tough question, and a question I've been asked a million times. The aspect of devolution of the health function has no issue. The only issue that we have, and we all recognize it, is the aspect of health workers. The people who work in the health sector feel that they ought to be treated like with a commission, like they are the only people who don't have a commission that serves their purpose. So for me, in terms of devolution of the health function to the county government, it is a success. We've read stories of how successful it has been. The sad stories are there, but largely it's a very successful endeavor. The only thing that we didn't get quite well is have a discussion in terms of health workers. How do they position themselves in a world where we see a scarcity of skills in some areas of specialization, and how we can be able to share that within counties, and how to treat them equitably. Even if you're working at national or county government, you're treated as a doctor across the board. And it's a conversation that we can't run away from. It's a conversation like Kenyans we need to have. What is the position and possibility to have roles undertaken by regional economic blocs it has its own role. The economic blocks is the way for the future. We need to specialize. We need to understand what are the economic advantages of every county government so that we don't all produce potatoes and we have no one to sell to. Let's understand who we are as a block. And it's very nice that regional economic blocks are emerging. They might be having challenges in terms of funding, but the aspect is it's a good conversation to go through so that we strengthen capacities of the county government and ensure that there's specialization. Is the need for modeling devolving local police? That one I don't want to go into it. Can I stop there, moderator?
Thank you, Commissioner Osoro. I'm sure the question by Honorable Cecilia Ngetich, the first woman rep Bomet County, has already been answered by Commissioner. And then thank you, Yvonne Mati, for the comments. I think it's largely a comment. Yeah, I see Mr. Osman also again making a comment. Thank you all. And thank you for the rest of the attendees who are still typing in their questions and comments. For the interest of time, we only have 2 minutes. Unfortunately, we have to stop at here. May I take this opportunity to thank the over 135 attendees of this webinar. From me, your moderator, Mr. Mohamed Ali, Deputy Clerk, Senate, the lead presenter, Dr. Kipkurui Chepkwony, the discussant, Commissioner FCPA, Rose Osoro. We will leave it at that. And may I now invite Hudson Mwakili, who is a member of the Webinar Planning Committee, to take 2 minutes to give vote of thanks, and we end there. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Hudson.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our host, Professor Nyokabi Kamau, EBS. We really appreciate your support, and thank you so much for allowing CPST to use this platform to reach out to Kenyans on matters of national interest. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Kipkurui Chepkwony, you have done justice to the topic, and we really appreciate you. We thank you so much. To our discussant of the day, FCPA, Madam Rose Osoro, you have cemented a keynote speaker's discussion, and you have been of great input, and we really appreciate you sincerely. Mr. Mohamed Ali, you have managed us well, and thank you. May Allah bless you. To all the participants who took time to register and log in, we are very thankful. And to the CPST webinar planning team under the chairmanship of Mr. Wino, we shall always ensure that we have you on board in our future webinars. Please note that before you leave, there is a question that will pop up, and kindly answer the question before you leave. And the recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel for all of us. God bless you all. Good afternoon, and thank you.